Picture this: Hollywood, 1933. A young woman strides onto the RKO studio lot, wearing something that would ignite a war lasting decades. Not a scandalous dress, not revealing attire. Trousers. Simple, tailored trousers. And the men in power? They were terrified. This is the story of Katharine Hepburn, the woman who wore pants when Hollywood screamed never, and changed not just cinema, but what women were allowed to be. The first time studio executives saw her in men's slacks, they panicked. In an era when women were expected to embody glamour, softness, and sexual availability on screen and off, Hepburn showed up looking like she'd raided a man's closet and didn't care what anyone thought. Her costume designer pulled her aside. Her agent begged. The studio heads issued warnings. Wear a dress. Be feminine. Be normal. Be like every other actress. Hepburn's response was to wear pants the next day too. But this wasn't just about fashion. In 1930s America, women wearing trousers was considered dangerously subversive. It challenged gender norms, so fundamental that some cities had laws against it, claiming women in pants were engaging in masquerading or disturbing the peace. For Hollywood, an industry selling fantasies of glamorous femininity to Depression-era audiences, a leading lady in trousers was commercial suicide, or so they believed. Katharine Hepburn didn't just believe differently. She didn't believe in believing what she was told at all. Born into a progressive Connecticut family in 1907, Hepburn grew up with a mother who was a suffragette and birth control advocate. She climbed trees, played sports, and was raised to question authority. While other girls learned to sit properly and speak softly, Hepburn was taught that her mind and body belonged to her alone. That upbringing became her armor. When she arrived in Hollywood in 1932, after Broadway success, she was 25 and utterly unwilling to play by the rules. Her first meeting with a studio mogul became legendary. He asked if she thought she could become a star. She replied, "I don't know, I may be too talented." The audacity was breathtaking, but here's what nobody expected. She was right. Her first film, A Bill of Divorcement, opposite John Barrymore, made her a sensation. By 1933, she won her first Academy Award for Morning Glory. She was a star, and a bright one, but Hepburn had no intention of becoming Hollywood's next delicate flower. She had other plans. Revolutionary ones. The pants became her signature, and the studio executive's nightmare escalated. RKO Pictures didn't just disapprove, they actively fought her. Memos circulated, meetings were called. The word came down from the top: Katharine Hepburn must stop wearing pants on studio property. It was unprofessional, it was unmarketable, it was, they claimed, damaging the studio's image. The conflict went deeper than fashion. Hollywood in the 1930s operated on a carefully constructed system of control. The studio system owned actors like property, dictating not just what films they made, but how they looked, who they dated, what they said in public. Every aspect of a star's image was manufactured, controlled, sold. Fan magazines breathlessly reported on actresses' beauty routines, romantic lives, domestic skills. The message was clear: these women existed to be looked at, desired, and to reinforce traditional femininity. Into this system walked Hepburn, who seemed allergic to being told what to do. She showed up to premieres without makeup. She refused to sign autographs, claiming it was undignified. She gave interviews where she was rude to journalists who asked stupid questions. And yes, she wore pants, constantly, everywhere. The studio heads held emergency meetings about the Hepburn problem. One executive memo, discovered decades later, referred to her as impossible to manage and suggested her masculine affectations were creating a dangerous precedent. The fear wasn't just about Hepburn. It was about what would happen if other actresses saw her defiance and decided they too could dress comfortably, refuse to play the Hollywood game, insist on being themselves. That's what terrified them. Not one woman in pants, but the idea spreading. Control was everything in the studio system, and Hepburn was proving it was an illusion. That's what terrified them. Not one woman in pants, but the idea spreading. Control was everything in the studio system, and Hepburn was proving it was an illusion. Hepburn ignored them, so they escalated. One morning she arrived at her dressing room to find it empty. Completely empty. Her clothes, all of them, every dress and every pair of trousers, had been removed. Stolen by studio order. The message was clear: if you won't dress like a lady, you won't dress at all. They wanted humiliation. They wanted submission. They got neither. Hepburn spent the rest of the day walking around the lot in her underwear. The story spread through Hollywood like wildfire. Journalists heard. Other actresses whispered about it. The studio, instead of breaking her, had created a legend, and they blinked first. Her clothes mysteriously reappeared. The unspoken truce was that Hepburn had won this round, but the war was far from over. Because here's what made Hepburn truly dangerous to the Hollywood system. It wasn't just that she wore pants. It was that she wore pants while refusing to be sexy in the way Hollywood demanded. She didn't pout. She didn't simper. She played intelligent, sharp-tongued, independent women who didn't need rescuing. In Christopher Strong, she played an aviator. In Spitfire, she played a faith healer. In Sylvia Scarlett, she spent half the film disguised as a boy. These weren't the compliant heroines audiences were used to. And audiences, at least initially, didn't know what to make of her. The numbers told a brutal story. After her Oscar win, several films underperformed. Spitfire was a disaster. Break of Hearts flopped. Sylvia Scarlett, where she dressed as a boy, was so poorly received that even director George Cukor told her never to speak of it again. Preview audiences walked out. Critics were savage. One reviewer wrote that Hepburn had as much sex appeal as a bag of bones. The criticism was personal, gendered, vicious. Hepburn was too thin, too angular, too masculine, too independent, too herself. Male actors could fail and recover. But for Hepburn, every failure was attributed to her refusal to be the kind of woman Hollywood wanted to sell. She tried to adapt, briefly. She took softer roles. She worked with different directors, but it never sat right. Hepburn playing conventional was like a tiger trying to purr like a house cat. Technically possible, but obviously wrong. Audiences could sense it. If they wanted conventional, they had a dozen other actresses. The point of Hepburn was that she wasn't like anyone else. By 1938, the backlash reached its peak. A group of powerful theater owners took out an advertisement in a major trade publication listing actors who were box office poison, stars whose names on a marquee actively drove audiences away. Katharine Hepburn was on that list. So was Greta Garbo, but Garbo played mysterious seductresses. Hepburn played women who acted like equals to men. The difference was critical. The studios saw their opening. RKO didn't renew her contract. She was 31 years old, 4 years removed from an Oscar win, and Hollywood had decided she was finished, washed up, too difficult, too masculine, too much herself. Most actresses would have disappeared. Hepburn had a different plan. She retreated, but didn't surrender. While Hollywood wrote her obituary, Hepburn was plotting resurrection. She understood something fundamental. The studio system had power, but she had something they needed: talent, name recognition, and the rights to a property they would kill to produce. She went back to New York and found The Philadelphia Story, written by Philip Barry specifically for her. Barry had crafted the perfect vehicle, a sophisticated comedy about Tracy Lord, a wealthy socialite whose icy perfection masks her fear of being human. The character was complicated, funny, vulnerable, sharp-tongued. Critics loved it. Audiences packed theaters night after night. The play ran for over 400 performances, and Hepburn had negotiated to buy the film rights before the play even opened. This was genius. She knew Hollywood would want this property. It was a guaranteed hit, and she owned it. For the first time, she held the leverage. She wasn't a contract player begging for roles. She was a producer with a hot property, and the studios needed her more than she needed them. When she took the play to MGM's Louis B. Mayer, she came with terms. She would sell them the rights, but only if she starred, and only if she got director and co-star approval. She wanted George Cukor to direct, the same Cukor who'd done Sylvia Scarlett, who understood her. She wanted Cary Grant and James Stewart as her co-stars. And she wanted script approval. The studio heads initially balked. This was a woman they'd declared box office poison, asking for creative control. But the play was too valuable. They agreed to her terms, acknowledging something revolutionary. Katharine Hepburn knew her value better than they did. It was perfect, a sophisticated comedy about a wealthy woman who learns to be more human. Hepburn didn't just star in it on Broadway, she bought the film rights herself. Then she took the property to Hollywood and made a deal. She would sell them the rights, but only if she starred, and only if she got director and co-star approval. A washed-up actress, declared box office poison, was dictating terms to Hollywood studios. The audacity would have been laughable if she weren't holding all the cards. MGM agreed. They cast Cary Grant and James Stewart opposite her. George Cukor directed. The film became one of the biggest hits of 1940, earned 6 Academy Award nominations, and completely resurrected Hepburn's career. She had saved herself, and she'd done it on her own terms, wearing trousers the entire time. But the real revolution wasn't just in Hepburn's comeback. It was in what she represented to millions of women watching. During World War II, when women flooded into factories and took on traditionally male jobs, they wore pants out of necessity. Rosie the Riveter became an icon, and suddenly women in trousers weren't subversive, they were patriotic. Hepburn had been ahead of the curve by a decade. After the war, when society tried to push women back into domestic roles, Hepburn's continued success in pants became quiet resistance. She never stopped. Through the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and beyond, she wore what she wanted, played who she wanted, lived how she wanted. She had a decades-long relationship with Spencer Tracy, a married man, and refused to hide or apologize. She didn't attend most of her own Oscar ceremonies, eventually winning 4, a record that stood for decades. She remained, always, herself. The Hollywood of the 1950s and 60s was different from the one she'd entered. The studio system was crumbling, television was stealing audiences. But Hepburn endured, adapting while never compromising. She worked with a new generation of directors, John Huston, David Lean, Joseph L. Mankiewicz. In The African Queen, she held her own against Bogart. In Suddenly Last Summer, she portrayed maternal monstrosity with terrifying conviction. In Long Day's Journey into Night, she gave one of the most devastating performances of addiction ever filmed. And through it all, the pants remained. They became so associated with her that costume designers would create elegant trouser suits specifically for her characters. The resistance had become signature style. Other actresses began to follow her lead, slowly at first. Marlene Dietrich had worn tuxedos, but as sexual provocation. Hepburn wore pants as simple declaration of comfort and autonomy. There's a difference between wearing men's clothing to titillate and wearing it because you prefer it. Hepburn's choice was the latter, and it was far more threatening to the status quo. By the 1960s, pants for women became increasingly common. By the 1970s, they were mainstream. Designer Yves Saint Laurent created Le Smoking, the first tuxedo for women, in 1966, crediting Hepburn as inspiration. Women began wearing pantsuits to offices. Female politicians fought to wear pants on the Senate floor, not allowed until 1993. Flight attendants sued for the right to wear pants instead of skirts, all fighting battles Hepburn had helped make possible. And by the time Hepburn was in her later years, being interviewed about her life, young women could barely comprehend that wearing trousers had once been an act of rebellion. But it had been. And Hepburn had fought that fight when it cost her everything. In her 80s, still sharp as a blade, Hepburn would wave away questions about being a feminist icon. "I just did what I wanted," she'd say. But interviewers who pressed would get glimpses of the battles, the studio trying to control her, the fights over billing, directors trying to undermine her. She'd talk about it matter-of-factly, without self-pity, the way someone describes bad weather they once endured. What she never fully acknowledged was how much courage it took. How many women would have simply worn the dress, taken the paycheck, played the game. Hepburn made it look easy because she was Hepburn, but it wasn't. It was terrifying and risky and could have ended her career permanently, and almost did. The studio executives who had stolen her clothes, who had declared her box office poison, who had tried to force her into compliance, they all eventually retired or died. Their empires crumbled or were sold. But Katharine Hepburn remained. She made over 50 films across 6 decades. She won those 4 Academy Awards. She became one of the most respected actresses in cinema history. And she did it all in pants. Here's what those studio heads never understood. Hepburn wasn't wearing trousers to be difficult. She wasn't doing it to make a political statement, at least not consciously at first. She was wearing them because they were comfortable, practical, and she liked them. The fact that this simple preference was seen as an act of war says everything about the world she was fighting. That's the real story, not that Hepburn was brave to wear pants, though she was. Not that she was a feminist icon, though she became one. The real story is that she thought it was absurd anyone cared at all, and she refused to pretend otherwise, even when it cost her everything, because the alternative was worse than any failure. She once said, "If you obey all the rules, you miss all the fun." But it was more than fun she was after. It was freedom, the freedom to be herself without permission, without apology, without compromise. In an industry built on manufacturing perfection and controlling images, Katharine Hepburn was defiantly, magnificently real. The woman who wore pants when Hollywood said never didn't just change fashion. She changed what was possible. She proved that a woman could be strong, intelligent, independent, and successful, all while refusing to play the game by men's rules. And generations of women who came after her, whether they wore pants or dresses, whether they went into film or any other field, owed her a debt. Because Katharine Hepburn didn't just open a door, she kicked it down, walked through wearing trousers, and never looked back.